notes.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me on set live is Shaka Sali himself. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
I am usually terrific, but I must add, frankly, that I am very, very delighted, if not hugely delighted, that you look even more this time, more exquisite, to the extent that I think you are ready to gather wings and actually take off in terms of fashion.
Sir, I will take that as a compliment.
Go for it.
Thank you so much. A warm welcome to you all our Facebook followers are watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka and ask him some pertinent questions about the politics on the continent. And today maybe we'll start off in France. Let's maybe start by expressing our solidarity with the people of France who are still in shock after fire, I think, gutted one of the most iconic cathedrals in Paris. If you've flown through Paris or if you've been in France, you can't miss that. Your reaction, Shaka?
It is, of course, in the heartland of Paris, the beauty of art, the beauty of love, the beauty of lights. And it is an incredibly historical, iconic landmark, which was built in the 12th century, really. And you can't believe it. Some sources say that it took the next 200 years, and others say 300 years to complete.
A lot of money has been flowing in terms of euros, or you can put it in dollars. Money has been flowing in from all corners. People are pledging to rebuild that. A while ago, President Emmanuel Macron, I think, and the Pope and the Catholic Church have vowed to rebuild. What does it take to restore such an iconic piece of infrastructure?
Well, it takes goodwill and it takes patriotism. And in fact, there's no shortage of that, because earlier, in the day before I came here to work, there are two of the richest individuals in France. Between them, they had already pledged about 300 million euros.
The number has actually gone up. It's all over 700 million euros right now.
These were only two individuals who happened to be French. And mind you, when you talk about the Notre-Dame, the iconic landmark that is the most visited landmark in Paris, perhaps in fact in France, yearly you are talking about 13 million human beings.
That's
13
incredible.
million human beings, and on a given day, you are looking at 30,000 people. If you put it in the context, by the way, the country where you and I come from, the Republic of Uganda, about how many tourists does it actually receive each year?
How about critics who are saying that perhaps it took too long for the firefighters to respond? In situations like that, in most cases, in the developed world, quote unquote, they say firefighters or responders are usually there in minutes. But we saw this thing just burn to ashes, and the firefighters were just there. It took them time to respond to the fire.
To be very honest with you, I don't really want to attempt even to go there, because I still need some information. I need to be able to make a judgment based on information. And so far, I do not have that type of information in order for me to comfortably really weigh in. But what I can say is that this is not only a loss of the people of Paris, nor is it a loss only of the people of France. It's a loss, in a sense, of the Catholic world. And in fact, the Christian world, and even beyond Christianity. Everybody pretty much, can't believe what actually happened there. And I think that the French president rightly said that he was saddened, like most of his compatriots, to see the Notre-Dame actually burned, because when it burns, it's like part of you, or all of us, in fact, are burning.
In terms of symbolism, what does that symbolize? What does that iconic cathedral symbolize?
It means different things to different people, but what we know historically, for example, is that in 1804, a great military general, some would consider, in fact, to be a great military genius, Napoleon Bonaparte, a man, of course, who became the emperor of France in 1804. He was actually crowned in that particular cathedral by a pope in that particular cathedral. And a great historical lady, Joan the Arc. Joan the Arc, the peasant lady, very courageous and very patriotic, and as far as France was concerned, actually led the French in several battles against the English. And she actually, in 1909, if I remember my history correctly, she was beautified in that particular church. It's a great place.
Let's now cross over to politics. Let's talk a little bit about politics. We have stuff happening on the continent. Last week, you correctly said, if I remember correctly, you said that it was just a matter of time before a soldier, a general, or anybody within close proximity to the State House to develop an appetite and take over the government. And it happened right after we left the show. Your thoughts? What are your immediate reactions since the coup happened?
I'm glad that what we talked about or we predicted happened, and it had to happen. It's not that we were the one, in fact, making it happen. Remember that you and I really are messengers, and we are messengers on the basis of the messages that we interact with. And so we were looking, for example, at the socio-economic political conditions that obtain on the ground in Khartoum and beyond. And so what we are looking at, in fact, in Khartoum, it's not limited to Khartoum, nor is it limited to the Republic of Sudan. It is something that could spill over all over the continent or the world, in terms of if, for example, you have these changing demographics in tandem with social media, which allows them to have remarkable opportunities of exposure, to know exactly what is happening within their neighborhood and beyond. And also, if in fact the economies of those societies are stupid, if these guys can't get jobs, they can't get an opportunity to put food on the table, if they don't feel like they have hope, what else is there left for them? It is change. Change is the only constant. And no society, no dictator should deceive themselves, by the way, that for some strange reason, even if they have some kind of divine rights, just like the ancient European kings, or kings, in fact, globally, who basically believed and, in fact, ruled by the fact that they had a sort of divine right, precisely because, by the way, Paul, majority of the people under them were, in terms of information, very much challenged. They were ignorant. They didn't know what was going on around that time, nor did they even know the relationship between them and that thing called the state or the government.
Interesting. Let's go to a comment. Let's go to Damasia Satetro. what does the current political trend in northern Sudan mean to the rest of Africa? You can also maybe add Algeria. What do those events mean to the rest of Africa?
I think what they mean is pretty much the same thing that I have just been talking about. I am talking about, for example, the changing demographics. One of these days, you'll wake up and you'll find that the young people form the majority of the people across the continent. And this changing demographic, this potentially politically powerful group of people, if they can mobilize and organize themselves, they are not invested in the status quo. They are not invested in the economy. They have no jobs. They have no future. Their future, of course, is ahead of them. They are more knowledgeable. They have access to information so much that they're exposed to know what is going on here and there. And they also know that the people that are leading them, their future is behind them. They do not have solutions, because if they had solutions, they would have created an environment that would have created not only hope, but also would have created jobs so that these young people could actually go to work and have the ability to get what is needed in order for them, for example, to bring food and put it on the table. Those things don't happen. If those things don't happen, and given that society is dynamic, it is not static at all. These older people who are in power, wherever they are on the continent, or in the world for that matter, they need to begin figuring out seriously and paying attention to making arrangements in terms of their exit, managing their exit strategy. Because if they don't manage their exit strategy, unfortunately, that particular exit strategy could actually be arranged by some other forces which may not necessarily be environmentally or even politically friendly.
Let's go to another comment. Let's go to Delta Kilo. Given that Bashir is gone, shouldn't the Sudanese stop the protests? As we speak now, the protests have been defiant. They have said, you know what, we are not going anywhere until our demands are met. How would you respond to Delta?
I think that the protesters really have a point, because let's face it, we're looking at change. They really want change. And this change is supposed to be reflected through what they hope is what they are part of, a revolution. They were not looking for the change of guards. They were not looking for a Paris coup. They are looking for situations which can help them change the obtaining socio-economic, political conditions on the ground, so that they can probably even become a society that is more transparent, more open, more, in a sense, a society that is democratically friendly. Democracy meaning they can actually have choice and have the opportunity, for example, to know and actually exercise the right to own an opinion that may not necessarily be in tandem or be on the same page with the ruling system, the ruling party, or the ruling soldiers, or the government for that matter. And in fact, it is very, very important for Africa to begin seriously looking at the fact that you don't make decisions without consultations. Because at the end of the day, you really work on behalf of the primary stakeholders. And the stakeholders are the people. Those people donate power to you. That power does not belong to you. You exercise it on their behalf.
Speaking about exercising power on their behalf, on the people's behalf, let's go to another comment from James Roberts. Using the situation in Sudan, for example, there are other dictators. He talks about Uganda, talks about Rwanda, talks about Cameroon, and the dictator of all dictators in Equatorial Guinea. What lessons should these people take away from the current situation in Sudan and Algeria?
Theodore Obiang should be counting his days. The time when there are leaders really who hoodwink people on the continent is gone. For example, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, I remember at one time, giving the highest nation's award to the president of Equatorial Guinea, Theodore Obiang Basongo, who at that time happened to be, by the way, the chairman of the African Union.
I should add Paul Kagame too received the same award.
Yes, now in this particular case, what I really am talking about, the award given to Theodore Obiang, sincerely, if I remember correctly, the Ugandan president was quoted as in fact giving him this award for, in his words, not mine, promoting African democracy. Now, the last time I checked, you know that they have elections every so many years in Marabo, in Equatorial Guinea, where Theodore Obiang gets in the neighborhood of the upper 90s in terms of percentage. And when you go to the national parliament, the last time I checked, there was only one individual who happened to be operating within the National Assembly. That is not democracy.
Let's go to the African Union. Reacted, and they have actually threatened to suspend Sudan if they don't transfer power within 15 days. Any possibility that this actual threat could actually maybe result into something tangible that the people of Sudan can hold and say, hey, we at least fought for this?
I think that at least the African Union has been courageous enough to be able to speak out. They may not necessarily have the means that can actually, for example, enforce whatever they are talking about. But I think symbolically it is very, very significant. You know, they also, by the way, have done that before. They actually did it to Egypt, even at a time when the United States itself, for some strange reason, was actually saying that there was no coup in Cairo. The African Union, at least at that time, was courageous enough to come out openly and said, no, this was a coup, and it should be seen for what it is, even though, of course, later, nothing much really changed. But you know what? I think it is very important for our audience to learn that the African Union and the international community, for example, no longer tolerate military coups. If a general, a colonel, a major, or even a corporal like Fode Sanko at one time in Sierra Leone was a corporal, and yet he had such enormous power. If you shoot your way downtown and you seize power, the African Union and the international community are not going to do business as usual with you. I wish they could, in fact, also extend that, for example, to making sure that when a country actually holds an election, it is going to be an election that is credible, that is transparent, that is verifiable, that is going to be an election and not a selection, an election whose results are in fact going to reflect the will of the people, not the will of the individual that announces the fake results, or not the will of the individuals who have actually been chosen by a dictator to form the electoral commission, so that in fact it is not about the will of the people who are counting the votes on behalf of the incumbent president, that they should in fact say, we are not going to do business as usual with that type of arrangement. And I think they should also in fact even go ahead and say, countries or the presidents who are in power, since, in fact, before they go to State House, they are sworn in. And guess what? When they are sworn in, they actually agree to defend and protect the Constitution. That, in fact, these very individuals should not be allowed, under any circumstances, to change these constitutions so that they can actually hang on to power. That if they do that, the African Union and the international community should simply say, we are not going to do business as usual with you, because in some way, shape, or form, that is in fact a coup.
How about critics? Let's first go to a comment from King Donga Theodore. He says, do you believe that the African Union represents people? Perhaps I can add that there are people who argue that African Union as an institution is the most hypocritical institution of all time. Why? Because they prop these leaders. Most of the leaders who have been at the helm of that institution are the same leaders that we are talking about, who have been disposed by their own people. Your thoughts?
Well, in fairness to the African Union, and I'm one of those critics actually who often say that you're looking at an institution that has teeth that do not bite. And part of the reason, frankly, is because you have to look at its structure. You have to look at how it came into existence. You also have to look at the kind of powers that it does have or does not have. The African Union is not, for example, an institution that has sovereign powers, like the European Union, for example. The European Union can do all sorts of things, and in order to qualify to be a member of the European Union, by the way, you must at least be able to meet some kind of democratic threshold. Whereas, on the other hand, when it comes to the African Union membership, all you have to do is to be an independent country. Once you are an independent country, it does not matter whether you are democratic, whether you are democratically challenged, whether you are a dictatorship, or whether you are whatever you are. So the thing is, we should not necessarily blame the African institution on the basis, frankly, of what it is or it is not. Because let's face it, there is a saying that under those types of circumstances, you have to agree to go to war with the army that you have rather than the army that you wish you had.
Okay, the interesting thought. Let's go to another take here. Let's go to Barbara Heather. What is the use of the African Union when they are silent on all the things that are happening on the continent? For example, look at the floods in Zimbabwe. Look at the xenophobia attacks in South Africa. They are silent, but they are quick to react to and threaten South Sudanese people that if they don't transfer power, they will suspend them.
Again, yeah, Barbara has a very legitimate point. There's no question about it. But again, as I explained a little bit earlier, you have to look at the structure. You have to look at the characteristic of the African Union. You have to look at the institution, the kinds of powers that it has and the kind of powers that it does not have. You know as well as I do that its predecessor, the OAU, the Organization of the African Union, it also came under enormous criticism. But the only difference between that earlier institution and this one is that, one, the OAU had the mandate, for example, of decolonizing the entire African continent from European colonialism and also ending the South African-based apartheid. And in fairness to the institution, it accomplished those two important things. Where it may not have done well, it is largely because, frankly, it did not have the mandate. Now, when you look at the African Union, unfortunately, it has yet to prove to us that it can really make a difference in the life of the average African. We also have to look at really what, for example, the goal of the organization, I mean, what, in fact, sometimes how the OAU operated. It was not allowed, for example, to interfere in the internal affairs of member countries, no matter whether a dictator was killing people, whether a dictator was hanging people, slaughtering them, and what have you. It was agreed that you cannot touch a member country as long as it is characterized as quote-unquote domestic or internal
problems.
Has
that changed?
Yes, it has changed
in
at least
way?
On paper, in the sense that right now the African Union does not have this business to deal with about not interfering in the internal affairs of a member country. In fact, it has a mandate that allows it not to be indifferent. So at least in terms of on paper, in terms of theory, it has the opportunity to make the difference. So yes, I think it is high time, for example, that in fact it should be able to go beyond simply talking the talk, so that it can in fact walk that particular talk, so that Africans can actually begin to walk the walk.
What lessons can be learned from what's happening in Northern Africa right now? In Algeria, in Sudan, what lessons can we draw from there, especially for young people?
Very simple, that for example, that as long as you have these emerging, changing demographics, and you cannot create conditions, frankly, that allow them, for example, to have a life, allow them, for example, to get jobs so that they can put food on the table, to allow them to exercise their inalienable rights, their birthrights of freedom, for example. As long as you cannot do that, they are going to have to do it because they have the power in the sense that they are the majority, they are more informed than previous generations. Luckily, they have the friendly social media, which exposes them much more than, for example, in the case of those of us who I said were beneficiaries at one time of the Gutenberg factor.
The printing press.
The printing press, because the printing press, mind you, Paul, was also not democratic. You had first and foremost to get the opportunity to learn how to be able to read, so that then you could actually form an opinion. But in this particular case, you can simply look at the pictures, and the pictures happen to reflect what is called a universal language.
What are you talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow we are basically taking you, the audience, to the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, and find out what is happening and not happening.
Very briefly, when are you going to talk about xenophobia attacks in South Africa? That's a comment coming in.
We'll pretty much talk about that. You know, we have the unfortunate disadvantage of being a platform or a program that goes out only once a week, each Wednesday. So sometimes we react to what is going on, and sometimes we take a bit of initiative. But we promise you that one of these days we're going to be talking about that, because let's face it, we need to forget what happened in Berlin, in the German
Shaka,
capital 1884, and say Africa.
Unfortunately, that's the time we have for the show today. We look forward to another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Until then, so long from Washington. Thank you, sir.
You're most welcome.